O.J. Simpson ignited a racial firestorm.
I think it's time for everybody to wake up and realize that we are in a for real world and we have dealt with racism all our lives.
Controversy, scandal. Let's bring in our guest today, Charles Feldman. He was working for CNN in New York at the time in 1995, and he was also there when the verdict was read on October 3rd.
The police department went on high alert when it was announced that the verdict was about to be read. When O.J. was found not guilty,
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A of felony.
there was a huge sigh of relief because everybody said there aren't going to be riots like the Rodney King thing.
Well, I was sitting next to Barbara Walters. She asked me my opinion before the verdict was going to come out. I said they made a mistake.
Was this rush to get something on the air, wall-to-wall coverage on television of trials. That was not a norm. There was no court TV. When the O.J. case came along, it was a godsend to CNN because the ratings went through the roof. There is a direct line between the O.J. trial and what became, for television in particular, reality TV. You couldn't get more real than that.
I never wanted to embrace being part of a trial and the witness, but it's with me forever.
30 years ago, a courtroom in Los Angeles detonated. O.J. Simpson, football god, accused of a horrendous double murder, walks free. It ignited a racial firestorm, controversy, scandal, you name it. L.A. was on fire practically, and one guy was there along with the rest of the media horde to cover all of it, and he is with us today. I'm Tom Zenner. Welcome to Tom Zenner Scandal and One Degree of Scandalous with the one and only Kato K-Train Kalin in the middle of all of this. 30 years ago, right now, is the anniversary of the verdict, October 3rd, 1995. Kato, we're getting into all of your recollections of that day.
Yeah, I remember exactly. I know exactly where I was.
Yep. And Kato, did you know this thing was covered pretty extensively by the media? Were you aware of that?
I was, as a matter of fact. It was, we'll get into the whole thing, but when you couldn't believe it, what it was like in Rockingham. You can't understand how the helicopters, the roads blocked. It's unfathomable. Nothing like it will ever happen again.
And it just kept escalating and escalating. We're going to get all Kato's inside of the verdict day. And let's bring in our guest today, Charles Feldman. He was working for CNN in New York at the time in 1995. He is assigned to go to Los Angeles and look for alternative killers, potential alternative killers if it wasn't O.J. And he was also there when the verdict was read on October 3rd. Charles, long career at KNX Radio right here in Los Angeles, CNN before that. We'll get into your entire resume later, but welcome to the show. And does it seem like 30 years ago, Charles, where you were there in Los Angeles and the city basically just ignited with that verdict?
You know, it's one of those things where sometimes it feels like it was an eternity ago, and other times I could swear it was just last week. It just has that kind of imprint on you, especially as you get older. Yeah,
and by the way, you look as young as you did back then. You look fantastic. And Charles, I agree with what you just said, because you look back, you go, my God, it's 30 years ago. And then you see a Netflix show, and you see something. And I tell Tom all the time when he asks me these questions, it's like yesterday. And, certain key words will get me just back in that exact moment. And sometimes, I forget some of it. Tom brings it back up, and I'm just blown away of how it could feel like it was yesterday. And then again, like you said, also feel like, eternity, 30 years ago, forever.
Well, I mean, I can remember whole conversations that I had with people, and not necessarily, very important conversations, but minor things. I remember with great detail going to lunch, for example, on a particular day when the court was in recess, say, with a colleague of mine. I can even tell you some days what I actually ate. Now, I don't remember what I ate yesterday, but I can remember some of those little mundane things from 30 years ago. And that's because when you have an event that is as seismic as that one was in many, many different ways, it does leave an imprint, I think, on you. And you tend to remember things very vividly things that, on most days you would never.
Yeah, well said,
Yeah,
huh? It's like a snapshot emblazoned into your brain, your
Yeah,
memory bank,
you go-
right?
it's
On
like-
those monumental days.
It's like Mary Lou Henner. She's got
She has
this
total recall.
total recall with everything.
Yeah.
And she knows exactly. And I'm the same way. I can remember conversations with a lawyer. I can remember being in the little closet waiting for my testimony. I remember Patty Fairbanks, the names that she was assistant to the
Right.
district attorneys. But I remember I can remember what she wore, and it's just goes right back. Even a smell of something.
Sure.
goes
Do
back.
you remember if you had a mirror in that little room, would make sure that hair was looking fine for
There
the
was
trial?
Tom. It was a clothes closet basically where you hung coats up. That's it.
You didn't
No
demand
air-
a green room or anything?
I didn't get it. I had no special privilege for Cato.
Oh, Cato. Okay, so we're going to get into all this because I find it totally fascinating that you were sent out here right at the perfect time. Cato, I mentioned at the top of the show, one of the assignments for Charles from his editors at CNN. By the way, CNN used to cover news, like legitimate hard news. This really happened 30 years ago where they would actually cover stories, report, and get info and scoops and all that. They don't really do that anymore. But Charles, I just find it utterly amazing that you were sent out here. One of your assignments was to see if there could be any potential, see what you could dig up. Could there be anybody else other than OJ? I have to get this out of the way. Was Cato on that list? I mean, was that one person?
No.
Okay, good.
No,
All right.
was not on the list.
Okay, so you came out here with that assignment. So where do you start with that? I mean, you're not a private eye, you're not a detective. So what was your strategy or your goal in trying to dig up some information on that?
Well, my background was in investigative reporting, not only at CNN, but in places I had worked before CNN. So, you very much operate the way that a detective would operate, with one key exception: you don't have subpoena power, of course. So you can't, demand that anybody talk to you. You can only ask. And that's what you do. You talk to one person and you ask that person, do they know somebody else who might know somebody else who might know something? And you keep following that link until you are satisfied that either you have hit gold or you have hit a brick wall. In the case of my initial assignment, which was along with another investigative team, by the way, to kind of look around and see if anyone else was a plausible possibility for those murders. I came up fairly quickly, I can tell you, with the notion that no, I didn't think there was anybody else involved, and I still don't think there was anybody else involved.
It's first of all, it's fascinating. I never knew that they had people who would come out looking for another killer. Besides, OJ said he's looking for the killer on the golf course. But did you work? You worked with an investigative reporter, journalist. Did you work with any private detectives that would give you hints?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, as an investigative reporter myself, the people that I would talk to is, I had, as many of us did, I had sources inside the LAPD. I had sources inside the FBI. I knew a lot of the attorneys involved on both sides for the prosecution once it reached trial, and I knew a couple of the defense attorneys from previous assignments I had had. So you kind of try to mine all of those people until you keep digging and digging and talking to them until they tell you to get lost, and sometimes they do, and then you go on to the next person. But also you follow leads. One person says, "Oh, we heard that so and so was inebriated at a restaurant the night before." So you go to the restaurant and you try to talk to the owner of the restaurant and say, "Hey, did this actually happen? And if it did happen, did you hear anything? And did you see anybody?" And so you keep following that sort of thing.
If you can say, what was one of the probably the most common one that you heard that you had to follow a lead on? Because I met with someone wanted me to meet this William Deere, who he had the book out, and believe it or not, it was Martin Sheen and Charlie to have dinner with him. He said, "Cato, you have to meet him." I said, "Okay." But my feeling was that OJ was it, and that's it. But I said, "Sure, I'll have the dinner." Is that one of your lead? But who was the biggest one that you had to follow up on, even though you had your opinion that it was just OJ?
Well, initially, and I think Cato in particular, you'll recall this. I think, there was great speculation, and it was mostly fueled by OJ's defense team. That Nicole brought it on herself, that she had, some skeletons in her closet, some involving perhaps the, illicit use of drugs, and there was talk at the time about Mexican cartels.
Right.
I mean, do you remember that,
Yeah,
Kevin?
yeah, they had that. They started the whole theory, so it was a drug, which
Right.
is just so far out in left field, like no possible way.
And there wasn't, and I actually don't ask me how, but I actually had some contacts at cartels in those days, and so I spent some time on the phone talking to people and meeting some pretty shady characters, and I walked away being convinced that was just, it was a defense. It was they needed to
Decoy.
come up
Yeah,
with
False flag.
You
Yeah.
know what, Tom? Exactly right. That they know that the media is covering it. They throw that in as to get you off the scent, so they have something else to go on. And it just so, when I heard that, I was like, why
Right.
do they even do this? And who do? And they can make people believe
Sure.
that because it became a big thing on Current Affair at the time and
Because-
hard copy, like the drug of they do a necktie killing or whatever it was called. The way it's just how they kept repeating and repeating, and repetition sometimes people can make people
Well, not
believe.
only that, but you have so many media covering it. The whole world's
Yeah.
here, right? Someone's going to run with that, and then it's gonna take up airtime. People are going to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's going to like divert. That's the whole idea of it. I remember the day of the verdict. I was working for NBC Channel 5 in Chicago, and it was a day off. So I flew to Minneapolis to play golf. I was playing golf at, I think it was Bear Path Golf Course.
You were looking for the killer.
I was
on the
searching for
golf
him on that
course.
golf course. Even I didn't see him that day. I was playing with my good buddy Paul Taunton, and we ran into the clubhouse once we knew that the verdict was going to go down. Now, Charles, you're a trained investigative reporter. Us guys, that work in the media like that. We just have great instincts. Great instincts, Cato. We can smell things, sniff it out. Okay, you knew the jury was only out hours, right? This isn't a 5-day, 2-week deliberation.
No.
What were you thinking? Were you taken off guard? Were you shocked by the verdict, or were you expecting that?
No, everybody was shocked by the verdict, considering how lengthy the trial was and how complicated the trial was. Look, most people who are accused of something as serious as murder, they are lucky if they can afford one attorney, let alone a caravan of attorneys
Of the best
who were
ones.
all,
Yeah.
who were all, and this was some of the best legal minds that money could buy. And look, and the prosecutors were pretty good also, and the evidence was, I thought, insurmountable. And most people in the media, we all presumed that it would take a few weeks for the jury just to go through systematically the evidence, what they thought of it, if they had questions for the judge. Those are all the typical things that happen. I've covered lots of trials, murder trials, civil trials, you name it. And typically what happens is, jurors are not attorneys. There's great confusion. They sit there, they listen to all this testimony, they're given documents to read. And normally when it comes time to deliberate, there are notes sent out over and over again to the judge. Can you explain this? Can you explain that? What's the law on this? What happens if we do A or if we do B instead? That kind of thing. So everybody, I don't know of a single reporter or lawyer who thought that this would go by as quickly as it did. And the reason it went by as quickly as it did was, I think it is widely believed, it was widely believed then, and I believe it still now, it was what lawyers call jury nullification. And what that simply means is that although the jurors are by oath supposed to decide guilt or innocence based simply on the evidence and the way the law is read to them by the judge, sometimes jurors decide to take matters into their own hands, and they put aside all the evidence, they put aside what the judge instructs them, and they reach a verdict on their own. And that's perfectly legal. It's the way the system is, and it's the reason why it took such a short amount of time. That jury was not going to convict O.J. Simpson.
Yeah, exactly right. That's what my opinion was. I saw them waving to OJ, and they liked the celebrity of it.
Yeah.
And I also think the jury didn't really understand DNA, and they probably, just to cover that in deliberation, they're probably like, let's not do DNA because it was so new and it was so confusing.
They were ready to go home.
Yeah,
I mean, that was a long time. That was a year of their life. We had 9 black, 1 Hispanic, 1 white, and 1 Native American on that jury pool, right? On that jury. So, I mean, in retrospect, in hindsight, it's not surprising, especially when you know what they said. Hey, Furman, the Furman testimony really did them in. That certainly was a brutal blow for the prosecution. What was your how many times did you go live? Because Jim Murray's a friend of ours, a really good friend of Cato's. He's been on our show multiple times.
I know Jim.
Of course. So he was anchoring all that. So was it just you're live, you go over here, do this, you're up in 10 minutes. Describe what it was like working for CNN with that type of breaking news.
Yeah, no, I did a fair amount of live, but my participation in the trial itself was not 100% because my job was to find out, if something came up at the trial, some tidbit. My job was to try to track it down and see whether or not the evidence made sense, that kind of thing. And then when I would have a result, I would go live with that. We had other people in the courtroom who were there for the entire time. When eventually there was a civil trial about a year later, that I stayed in the courtroom for the entire time because there was really nothing to investigate. It was pretty straightforward.
It's funny, Cato, because your assignment to go to L.A. to cover this and to look for an alternative killer and then stay there for the verdict, you never went back, right?
Never went back.
Okay, so
well, I got to tell you something. It's kind of interesting that, and it shows you how the economics of media have changed in 30 years. When I came out here from New York, I had a really nice place in Lower Manhattan, opposite what was the then old World Trade Center. That was my place. And when I came out here, I told my bosses that, look, my life is in New York. I'll go and I'll cover this in LA, but I have to go back every weekend. I'm not staying out in LA 7 days a week. And they agreed to that, much to my amazement. And in those days, if you remember, you used to, when you booked an airplane ticket, younger people won't even know what I'm talking about. You actually got a ticket.
Right. Paper.
Remember, you actually had a paper ticket.
Watch a movie from the 90s, you'll see.
That's right. And I used to go there used to be a United Airlines ticket office in the lobby of the CNN building on Sunset Boulevard. Building, of course, is still there, not the United ticket office. And they got to know me very well because what I would do is I would go every 2 months and I would get 5 or 6 round trip tickets that CNN paid for. So I had them. And what I would do pretty much like clockwork is Friday night, I'd head to LAX, go back to Manhattan. Sunday night, I'd turn around, come back to LA.
Yeah. That's a lot of miles. You racked up the miles.
A lot of miles.
Let me tell you, the OJ mileage on United Airlines was the gift that kept on giving. Those miles got me to Japan. It got me to first class tickets to, I think it was Germany. I racked up quite a bit because CNN allowed reporters to keep the mile points.
They should.
Did you have chicken or the beef?
Both.
Yeah. At least you didn't do what the major league umpires or the NBA refs did. Remember, they'd be required. Part of their bargaining agreement is they fly first class, right? So a lot of them would trade those tickets in
and
downgrade to coach and pocket the difference and then not pay taxes. And a lot of them got nailed on that, right? Wow. But that's pretty cool if you can just go back and forth. When you're young, that's glamorous. That's fun. That's exciting. You hit the best 2 cities in America every single week. Okay, so you're in the scrum. I mean, there are so many media people out here, print, TV, radio, you name it, foreign, everywhere. Everybody's here and everybody's fighting for a scoop, a morsel, something different. Did you see some unethical, crazy stuff from other reporters? Now, come on, statute of limitations has gone by. You can name names, no problem. But did you witness anything where people would do anything, even if it meant reporting something that they knew wasn't true? What did you learn or what did you see? Just following this.
I tell you how it normally works when you talk about how things are reported that are either inaccurate or, if not unethical, certainly maybe not 100% kosher. Um, we all get leaks, and I mentioned that I had my own sources, and most reporters in town who had been here any amount of time, certainly they had their own sources. But sources use you. It's a two-way street. You use them to get information. They use you to get what they want across to the public, their own agenda. And all too often, and this is not just the OJ case, I think this is almost uniform in the way the press operates, with few exceptions. Uh, there's too much of a hurry to publish, too much of a hurry to get something on the air just because, quote, a source told me this happened, end quote. Well, maybe it happened, maybe it didn't happen. Maybe the person who told the reporter that something happened was because that person was trying to deflect attention away from something else. And so the real big problem with the OJ trial, and again, it's not just for the OJ trial, but there was so much intensity on that one, it stood out, was this rush to get something on the air. You know, CNN at the time, there had only been three, up to OJ, there had only been two prior wall-to-wall coverage on television of trials. That was not a norm. There was no court TV, for example. When OJ started, it was just starting out. CNN did the first one years before OJ. It was a case in Massachusetts. And then the next one was the case of Klaus von Bülow, which I actually covered. And we were on the air. I was on the air practically 24 hours a day. And then along came the OJ case. So when you're on the air that much, and CNN was practically the OJ channel, very little other news came along. Before the OJ trial, CNN's ratings were not very good, by their own admission. There were people who were destined, had things gone along that way, to lose their jobs. I'm talking about higher executives. When the OJ case came along, it was a godsend to CNN because the ratings went through the roof. And in television, you guys know this, when the ratings go through the roof, if you're managing that network or that TV or radio station, you are not going to back off that story. In fact, you're going to go full steam ahead to keep those ratings where they are, because ratings translate into advertising dollars. So, you know, there was this constant, you know, every time I had trouble keeping up, and I knew most of the stories that were going to come out before they came out. And even I kind of lost track, and I started tuning them out.
Yeah. It's manna from heaven, actually, because it spurned so many, it's court TV started. I think CNN, not just, I did Larry King at least 9 times. Then Greta Van Susteren, Roger Cossack, they all, Burden of Proof started. I think other shows, it started having its own spinoff because of a trial. And just, it was a moneymaker. Like I said, manna from heaven, and it made executives keep their job. And
yeah, it's almost like when it was over, it's like the Super Bowl's over. And what do you do now, right? How do you fill this airtime?
Well, and not only that, it really, if you think about it, there is a direct line in terms of lineage between like the OJ trial and what became, for television in particular, reality TV. Mm-hmm. Reality TV really didn't exist before OJ. But when the OJ trial happened, you couldn't get more real than that. The stakes were real. The stakes were high. Someone was accused of 2 brutal murders. So, the public was riveted to it. And of course, this is before the fragmentation that you have now with social media. So all eyes were on the OJ trial. I doubt you could have gone to any office building in America the day after any particularly explosive testimony and not pick up conversations about what those people saw and heard on TV the day before.
100%. The late, great Larry King, and this is his words, not mine. When I did a show, he said, "Kato Kalin, you are the first reality star ever."
Wow.
I even tried to give him my guest house key. He turned it down.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, no, you should trademark that. I mean,
Yeah,
that is. I mean, think about it. Larry King would know, right?
He was great. Like I said, I get invited to many events with him, and it was great.
All right, Kato, let me give Charles the proper introduction here. 20 years CNN investigative reporter in LA and New York, KNX. Now he's doing he's a political analyst for several UK radio and TV programs, host of the SOS America podcast on YouTube and elsewhere, and an adjunct professor at USC. Was as well as an author. So we got the right guy talking about this. Now, Charles, you're going to dig this story. Kato, I mean, you were in the middle of all this, right? And verdict day, you were at a special place. And why don't you describe October 3rd, 1995, as far as how it started, where you were, who you were with when you got the verdict, and what you did after?
Well, I was at the Century City Plaza Hotel in Century City, and sitting next to Barbara Walters, and we were going to do a show, but I decided not to do the show live after the verdict. I wanted to wait, but she asked me my opinion before the verdict was going to come out, and I whispered that after they made the verdict, I said they made a mistake. Of course, my opinion, after hearing, I was sequestered, but then I heard the evidence after the fact. I was like, how can all this evidence not convict someone? But then again, I saw the jury, and I thought, you know what, the Rodney King just happened. It's just going to happen that way. So I just whispered. I said they made a mistake. Did
you immediately do an interview with her, or did you say you needed a little time? Or
no, we actually did an interview after the fact. So we were there, and it was ABC, like another show that 2020 became huge because of the trial. I think every player in the trial was on her show or on all the shows, Larry King, because it was just the thing. Larry King used to be on every day. Yeah. So he was getting the guest. But Barbara Walters was, the late Barbara Walters was terrific to me.
Yeah. And by the way, you know how that competition works for the shows. It's fierce. The Today Show, Good Morning America, I left one out, CBS Morning News, whatever. They all have an army of producers. And they fan out, and their sole job, is to get the first guest, whether it's you, Kato, or one of the defense attorneys or the prosecuting attorney, and they make deals with people. They say, well, do you have family because they don't pay for interviews, but there's a backdoor way of paying for interviews. What they'll do is they'll say, well, you're going back to, Cincinnati, you live in Cincinnati. We'll fly you back to New York to do the Today Show, and sure, bring your family along. And yes, we'll give you a stipend while you're here. And sure, we'll pay for all the dinners and all that. So do they pay for the interview? No. Do they actually pay for the interview? Yes. But there's a lot of competition for that. So yeah, it's a circus.
It's amazing because at the height of it, I have the letters still of people. They'll just write you letters, producers going, you'll be on the #1 show. You'll meet Katie Couric. And it was with everybody. And it was new to me. I actually ended up me having my own people, a publicist, and they would just, everybody would contact you. Everybody wanted to get an exclusive. Yeah. And so I felt kind of bad if I turned someone down that I liked. I was like, oh, I feel
bad.
I get
you tomorrow?
Don't hate me, please.
Yeah. You mentioned Barbara Walters. Just a quick side story about another trial, but it shows you how this operates. I had mentioned I had covered the Klaus von Bülow retrial. He had been convicted, it was overturned, and then he was acquitted, and he had Alan Dershowitz, in fact, as his main attorney. And CNN and we were all encamped in like a trailer van outside the court, and I would do live throughout the day. The big thing there, the big get for that was who at the end of the trial was going to get Klaus von Bülow as the first interview. Well, all of a sudden, somehow Barbara, I think it's because we had the same agent, Barbara got the phone number into the van that we were staying in. And she started this campaign because she found out that at the end of the trial every day, Klaus von Bülow would come and sit with us for a few minutes just to see, hey, he'd go, hey, fellas, how did the trial go? That kind of thing. When she found that out, she started calling almost every day to either talk to him or she would send flowers in an effort to make sure that when the end of the trial happened, that she would get the first interview. And you know what? It worked. She got the very first interview.
Barbara knows what she's doing.
Yeah. What was your opinion of that trial? Did you think he was guilty or not?
Yes. I think that I think he got off, again, some brilliant legal minds at the time. And I think the jury had a hard time. For those people who don't know who Klaus von Bülow is, he's passed away now, but he was a British, actually German British, but he was an attorney and very wealthy, and he had married someone by the name of Sonny von Bülow, became Sonny von Bülow, who went into a very long coma, and von Bülow was accused of putting her into that coma by giving her an overdose of insulin because she was diabetic. And he was originally, at the first trial, convicted, and then there was an appeal. He was granted a retrial. And at the retrial, he was acquitted.
Jeremy Irons.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. If you're going to have a great criminal name, Klaus von Bülow.
It's a
central
Bond,
casting.
He's a Bond villain.
Yeah. All right. I was lucky. I was in the United Center for Michael Jordan's NBA Finals games for 3 straight years, 95 to 98. And there'll never be anything that will eclipse that as far as energy, where it's palpable, where you just feel it. It's just incredible. Could you guys feel that in LA after the verdict? Now, remember they had the Rodney King riots 3.5 years earlier, so a lot of LA was still burned down from that. So, it wasn't as much of a riot as 92, but could you sense there's just this thing in the air right now?
Yeah, with the difference being Michael Jordan thing, the energy was very positive.
Oh, yeah.
The energy in LA was...
But it's something you can feel, right?
I could drive my car if someone liked me or hated me. If someone didn't like me, they would come right up to the car. People would spit at me. I have no idea why. I had a BMW convertible in the top down. I got rid of that car that week because I was so approachable, and people could be just so loving and so hating at the same time. So the energy was just it was very divisive, and it was very, very difficult because I'm a people person. So when someone said 99 people love me, one person, that's the one person I'll think of, and it affected me the entire time.
I'm glad that there've been several references thus far. We've mentioned in passing Rodney King, and I'm glad that we did, because you cannot talk about the O.J. Simpson trial without actually bringing into it what happened with Rodney King. When I was talking a little bit earlier about jury nullification, why would the jury want to, toss aside evidence? Why would they, in effect, disobey the law as given to them by the judge? The thinking at the time was, and I do think that was the case, that this was a jury that wanted, in its own view, to make up for the injustice of Rodney King. The Rodney King acquittal of those police officers, the subsequent riots in LA, those were only very few years before OJ. And here you had this very potentially explosive case. You had an African-American defendant who was really, for all intents and purposes, a star. He was a sports star. He was a TV movie star.
He was a huge star. One of the biggest stars at the time. He was an icon. Yeah.
Yeah, and here he was accused of killing 2 white people, and Nicole and
Ronald Goldman.
Yep. Ronald Goldman. Thank you. The name's something like and Ron Goldman. They're 2 white people. So there was this tension. This is the tension that everyone was feeling. The tension wasn't, is OJ going to be convicted or not? The tension in LA, anyway, was, if he is convicted, would there be a repeat of the riots? The police department, for example, went on high alert at the time when it was announced that the verdict was about to be read. All the news media, everyone started sending out reporters to all the sort of hot spots at the time in the LA area, where if there were to be rioting, they thought rioting would occur. So when OJ was found not guilty, there was a huge, huge sigh of relief, because everybody said, oh, good, there aren't going to be riots like the Rodney King thing now. That's the tension that was felt. Yeah. And that's why these two trials are, in a very odd way, or true stories, I should say, are actually linked. And the OJ, a lot of what happened in OJ, a lot of the public perception, what the jury did, might have been very different had Rodney King never happened.
Yeah. It seems like, back then, Rodney King, those were real riots, right? You don't have to bring in paid people and print up signs for them. I mean, that was just raw, right? Now it's a little bit different with what's going on. Was the jury, obviously they were sequestered for a very long time in a hotel. Did they cut off their TVs where they couldn't watch news? Did you guys ever remember if that was the case?
Yeah, they had to.
Because
there was no news. They couldn't watch the news at all.
Right.
You're sequestered. I couldn't watch the news, and I was not on the jury.
But that was the honor system with you. You just you would have to not turn it on.
But the jury itself in the hotel, they had no TV. They had tapes. They could have videos. They could have entertainment. Jay Leno went in there, but Ito would try to do things to keep them, because it was such a long time of how can we keep them, going berserk. So they hired people to come in there.
Yeah. Charles, did you ever talk to a jury member after the verdict?
Yes.
What was your thought? Like, they would just get me the hell out of here, or hey, we put a lot of analysis in this and we really struggled with the decision, but we feel good about it.
And I want to add something to Tom's question with the jury, so you can answer both of them. And do you think there were drops of hints before the verdict of maybe the people that walk him in, a guard saying, be careful with the decision, it's going to be riots? Do you think someone could drop a hint also? But to Tom's question, then mine.
Oh, I can do both, in it because it's kind of one of the same answer. I mean, the jurors, some of them anyway, I think were very aware of the burden on them, and they were very aware, as people who were from Los Angeles, after all, of what this tension was. I mean, they knew that. They may have been sequestered from trial coverage, but they certainly had access to news about other things happening in the world and in the country and in Los Angeles. And so I think they did have those concerns. Some of them that I talked to afterwards, thought it was overly long. They thought the trial was too much in the weeds, and that happens when you start bringing in, as was the case with the OJ trial, forensic material and DNA and blood analyses and all that. We talk about people being judged by a jury of their peers. Well, that's not actually true. It may have been true, 200 years ago, when most of the country were all farmers, but nowadays, I think, this is my own personal opinion, I think it's rather unreasonable to have a lay jury go through the kind of evidence that really requires a lot of technical expertise. It's kind of like medical malpractice cases. I mean, how do you expect a jury of non-physicians to evaluate whether a physician did or didn't do the right job in a surgery? Based on what?
Yeah, that's a really great way to look at it. Really is, because medical malpractice, you'd have to know something about it in the jury. So, that's So you're right about that.
How about did you get a chance to talk to Ito? I don't know if he ever made himself available, or once this thing was over, where the lawyers were doing scrums, right? I mean, a million of microphones in front of them. Were you in those scrums? Did you try to pull people aside to get some one-on-ones?
No, I tried through back channels to talk to Ito, but I'm trying to think. I think he talked to Linda Deutsch, who was the AP court Associated
Remember
Press,
Linda,
court reporter, who passed away not that long ago. I'm not sure he ever has. I'm trying to think. I may be wrong about this. I don't think he ever gave an interview. He may have talked to her. And he may have talked to people on background so that his name wouldn't be linked to it. But I don't. Cato, do you remember?
No, you're absolutely right, which is it doesn't make sense to me, because he loved it when he had Jay Leno come in, and he loved the dancing Itos. So you'd think that he would be waiting to do interviews, but he didn't do any.
Yeah, I don't think he did. I don't think you can find certainly a television or radio interview. Maybe there's something in print that I don't know about, but I don't think you'll find him commenting on it at all. It was a very bad time for him because he was so criticized, the poor guy, through no fault of his own. He was thrust into a situation that no other judge would have any experience with. And I actually am of the opinion, which is probably a contrarian one, that I thought he did a fairly good job. I think, considering the enormous pressure and media attention and the camera on the guy, he's a judge. He's not a performer. The three of us, we're all used to being, we're used to doing radio, television, all that. He's a judge, was a judge. He all of a sudden became a TV star. That's a lot to ask of somebody.
Yeah, because you look at the guy, he's on TV every day, so he stars during the soap opera hours. But and also difficult because I believe that he had taught Darden and Cochran, and he's got this where he knows people on defense, he knows people on the prosecution side, and he has relationships with them. So you got to be thinking that I'm sure they've had dinners and drinks together or something. So he's got to play it just right.
Yeah, and no judge goes out there looking to be famous, but he seemed to enjoy it. I mean, you talk to the people that knew him at the time. He enjoyed some of the attention, but I would imagine he was probably getting death threats too. So maybe at the end of the trial, he's thinking, "I'm out. I've had enough time in the public eye here. Put me into traffic court or something low key, right? I want to stay out of the public eye."
And I swore to myself, the next time I see a judge, it'll be the Miss America contest. No more trials for me, man. I'm done.
And he lived up to that, by the way, Charles. He 20 years on the bench, Hawaiian Tropic.
Hawaiian Tropic too. I was going to say that, but they're out of business now. It was they're doing Banana Boat.
Yeah. Hey, Charles. Dream scenario, you get to talk to one guy one-on-one, you get an hour, anyone connected with it where you could maybe connect some dots, fill in some blanks, answer some questions. Who would you pick of all the people, all the characters that were involved in the OJ saga, for 2 years? Who would you pick? Because I'll give you my pick if you want.
Well, I'll tell you who it was, because I did talk to him afterwards, and that was OJ. I wanted to talk to him. And I did talk to him. Actually, I'm trying to think. I think it was 2 times. This is over a period of years. But he was so guarded, and he was so kind of enmeshed in his own story that I think I don't think he was lying. I think he believed what he was saying. Why he believed what he was saying, you'd have to kind of...
So you're saying he's a sociopath, like Tom Lang says, right? That's what you're saying.
I was going to say that you'd have to really ask some, like a shrink, whether they thought that was...
Well, if he did it, he knows he did it, but he believes what he's saying. He's a sociopath.
And by the way, you nailed it just right. He could lie so much that he would believe the lie. Where did you talk to him? Like how?
By phone.
Oh, by phone. Okay, I was going to say, did you meet in person? What it would be like? Because
no.
Yeah, in person it'd be even different because you can kind of look at that face and go, "This guy is just full of it," and not on the phone. It's just very, very easy to get away with lying.
Did he try to put on that charm? Did he try to like schmooze you a little bit like he used to, or was he brought down a notch and humble?
Well, the last conversation I had with him, he was involved in that whole. I don't think you want to get into the whole Las Vegas.
We've done that many times, but we don't need to do it now. But yeah, we've done it.
That's what I'm saying. So he was already kind of getting into that. So no, he wasn't really, he wasn't so much focused on being charming. He was, though, professing his innocence on that particular case, as he did throughout until the day he died. The OJ, the murder case, except for that weird book. I
was going to just mention that to you. The If I Did It,
If I Did It,
and they do a show on Fox on that. It was just kind of
that blew up in their faces. But it was a money grab for him.
And If I Did It was basically his telling how he did it. Yeah. Who was your pick?
For me, it's easy. It's Al Collins. I would love. This guy's in the middle of everything. He's driving the Bronco. Who knows on the night of the murder where he was? Definitely, come on. He's in Kardashian's house when they take off for the Bronco chase. Right. That's my guy.
How did I know?
He would just fill in so much a mystery that we have right now,
and how they planned it when they're leaving because they were supposed to turn themselves in. Of how OJ comes up to him and goes, "Hey Al, you and I, let's go, let's ditch," and it's like, "Oh, okay, let's do it."
Yeah, I remember too when he was. Go ahead.
Well, there is one other person I would love to have talked to about it, but they wouldn't. I'm sure they would not have agreed to it if they knew what the purpose of the interview was. I'd love to talk to whoever it was who got rid of the murder weapon.
Well, we on our show we've
Yeah.
got Skip Junis. Our show is he was not used as a witness. Skip Junis, his wife worked at American Airlines. He's parked right behind the limo, and he sees
LAX.
OJ going into the bag that I described to the detectives that OJ would not let me touch. Puts his arm halfway all the way to the elbow, pulls something out, and puts it halfway down the elbow of the garbage can.
At LAX.
At LAX, and he met with the detectives, and he's extremely credible.
Yes, he was a ad executive for Time Warner, so he sold ads for Time and Sports Illustrated
And
back in the
People
glory days
magazine.
where he had big expense accounts, right? So his wife worked for American. He was picking her up at the airport, and he was right there on the curb at LAX at American. Alan Park drives the limo up. He's right there. He sees it. OJ gets out with that bag that Cato described, reaches into the bag and sticks his hand all the way down the garbage can and starts dropping items in there.
Corroborated with Alan Parks, the limo driver, saw the exact same thing.
Yeah, and then by the
So
time
you
the
had
detectives...
two witnesses right there.
And then, like, by the time the detectives got to it, that they even went to the landmine or the landfill,
landfill.
right? But it was way too late, so they didn't get that information till late. For some reason, they didn't use Skip Junis in the trial.
Yeah.
You also covered the civil trial, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously the difference is OJ had a talk there, right? And he didn't speak, he didn't testify in the criminal trial. So you saw a different side of him in that one. What was your take as far as his demeanor, how defensive he was, how confrontational he was, and just where that whole thing went?
Well, the civil case is very different from a criminal one because the standard of proof is much, much lower, and you don't have to prove something beyond a reasonable, doubt. And, to be quite honest, I actually, it's interesting. We started off talking about how some things are kind of burned in your memory from 30 years ago. And oddly enough, his testimony for that is not really burned in my memory. And I can't tell you why. I think it may have been OJ burnout. Maybe that's the explanation. But I actually don't have any great recollections from that particular trial. Civil cases are they take a long time. They get really into mundane things. And then a lot of it is about money and who has what and who's entitled to things. So I wish I could give you a great portrait of how that testimony went down. But I have to be really honest that all these years later, the civil case did not really register, and it didn't with the public, by the way. I mean, it certainly, there was great expectation from CNN, understandably, that the civil case would repeat a year or so later, 2 years later. The ratings, skyrocketing ratings that the murder trial did, it didn't. The public at that point, they either believed he did it or they believed he didn't do it. And by the time the civil case came about, you're not going to change any minds. It was just not going to happen. So the public lost interest. And I guess now that I look back on it, all these years later, I wouldn't have admitted it to my employers at the time. I guess I kind of lost interest too a bit.
Yeah, it's also amazing that OJ, that he kept getting in the news in the wrong way with either the wrong group of people he hung out with, 911 calls coming in from Florida with his daughter, the robbery in Las Vegas. He just kept doing bad, and it just because you hang around bad things, bad individuals, things are going to go bad. But he never, he just went so off the cliff. It's just from being this huge celebrity. His interviews were, do you see yourself black or white? He goes, I see myself as OJ. It was just kind of, he broke the barrier of white and black that he could do ads for.
But Cato, do you remember when we had Norman Pardo on?
Yeah.
Right, the guy that had the rights to do a documentary or a reality show with OJ. So he had hundreds and hundreds of hours of video with OJ. Man, OJ is not that Hertz rep. The guy you saw on NBC, he had two sides to him. He was very street. Like when you listen to how he spoke when he was in Florida, after he escaped and, got acquitted and then, went to Florida not to have to pay the civil judgment. He didn't sound like the polished O.J. Simpson that lived in Brentwood. He was a different dude, right? And I think, that's why he's capable of something like this. This wasn't this guy, that, is worth tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. That's a hero to people. I mean, there was that ability in him, right? And then you lived there. I don't know how much you saw, but
one of the sad parts of the whole OJ story, and sad for Nicole, was, she was abused by OJ. She reported it many times to the police. There was a long record of that, and nothing ever happened to OJ because even the police believed the Hertz OJ. To them, he was the guy that was doing, jumping. I think the commercial wasn't like, I don't know, leaping,
flying through airports.
Yeah, it was hurdling.
Hurdles over luggage.
Yeah, and that's the OJ they saw. So the police department had blinders on, and if Nicole was not together with someone like OJ, I think that probably that person would have been hauled off by the cops long before she would have been in a position to be murdered. But the police, they bought it. I mean, it's very hard for the public to fight against celebrity. For people, especially who are on television more than movies, because you invite these people into your homes. Yeah. And nobody wants to admit that, hey, I've just invited a murderer into my house.
Yeah, with the one exception of Diddy, he tried to get the verdict thrown out, no go. Yeah. He's still waiting for sentencing, and that sentencing could be 7 to 11 years in prison. He better get comfortable. Diddy, man, this isn't going the way he thought it would. Charles, you were young back then, right? I mean, what's it like to cover the biggest story you'll ever cover? And then what can top that? So what were some of the other, obviously Michael Jackson, we had that big story here in LA. What were some of the other big highlights of your career after
Boston
that?
bombing too, right?
I didn't do Boston, but you mentioned Michael Jackson. I did cover some of the case up in was it Santa Barbara, the child molestation thing, and I just had this funny thing that happened with him. He kept away from the press for understandable reasons, and he had a whole army of people who helped him do that. But one day I was in court, and it was in recess, and I went to the men's room in the courthouse. And it's not like LA. It was a very quiet kind of courthouse, And I walked out, and there was nobody there except Michael Jackson, who had, as I recall, I don't know if it was a cast or a bandage. He had something on his arm.
It's a white glove.
It's a glove that he used. It was
No,
OJ's.
not the glove. I know, not the glove. No, it was like a whole arm thing. And so there I am. It's just me and him. So I said, what happened? Because I knew he wasn't going to talk about the trial. That would have been foolish to try to talk to him about the case. He was well enough acquainted with how media works that he would have shut him up. So I said, what happened to you? And he went into this whole thing about how he had been bitten by a spider and had a reaction to it, and how much he disliked spiders, and spiders scared him. And it was this weird conversation. It couldn't have lasted more than maybe 5 minutes, if that. And then, other people started showing up, and he, left. But that was my sole quote interview with Michael Jackson at his trial, telling me how he was afraid of spiders.
That's the headline story there. Michael Jackson hates spiders.
They have legs. They're so furry. I don't like them. The tarantulas are horrifying.
Here's the fun fact. Michael Jackson and I had the same publicist.
And here's another fun fact. Kato had a bathroom run-in with somebody too. Why don't you share that one?
I had a run-in with O.J. Simpson during my deposition. After I had sat for 3 hours or more, and just, at that point I was civil trial. I kind of stood up for myself, and I just, he wanted, I was talking very degrading about him because I said O.J. just has an ego and sociopath. I said, I think my opinion was during the deposition, and now I'm in the bathroom by myself without knowing it after I said all these things. And I was at the urinal, true story, and he walked in. He goes, hey, and I could not pee from nervousness, and I said, no, I'm going to go. And then I left, and I said, how do you feel about spiders? No.
Hey, I think the moral here is, if you're a young journalist, man, just hang out in the bathroom. That's where the scoops are. I
have a question that's off from everything else. And Charles, so researching and I find out that you are also a pilot. Let me ask you a question. When you're on, if we were on a jet and someone said, "Can someone fly this plane?" Would you be able to actually fly from a G4 up to a 727? Would it be the same? I mean, because I don't know what kind of planes you fly, but would you be able to go into the pilot's seat if the pilot went down?
Well, and people have asked me that. The answer is probably no, but I'll qualify that. I mean, I've flown smaller planes, but I have had a chance to pilot small business type jets. But I did take, for about a week and a half years ago, United Airlines was very nice and allowed me to go out to Denver, where they had their training facility at the time. And so I trained in their simulators for both the 747 and I think it was a 777. And I was told at the end of it, because these simulators are very authentic and realistic, and they do train actual airline pilots on them. And I was told at the end of it that I did successfully land the simulator. So the instructor said, "Well, if you can land the simulator, you can land the actual airplane." So, but I don't believe that.
Well, I'll tell you what, that's the wrong answer. If I'm on a plane and it's going down and you're on it, I'm buckling you in. I might even duct tape you into the pilot seat. Right. You're better than anybody else trying to do it.
Well, and also, if that ever did happen with someone, they would be telling you what instrument to hit, correct? And you would right. understand most of that. Saying
right, and that's right. And most of the bigger airliners now, and not the little tiny regional jets, but the big airliners, are fairly automated. What pilots do on those kind of planes, they're basically, not to take anything away from them, it's a hard job, but they basically are monitoring computer systems. And the plane is on autopilot for most of the time you're in an airplane. From the time the plane takes off until it gets to a few hundred feet, once those flaps are retracted and the plane the nose levels down a bit, that plane is almost always on autopilot. And a lot of the big planes and big airports also allow automatic landing. So the plane can actually land and taxi without the pilot doing anything, just pushing the right buttons.
Was it like the Sully movie when you're at the simulator in Denver? Was it like pull up, pull? Remember when that simulator, pull up, pull, too close, too low?
Yeah, no, we had some. I remember they did some like exercises. I don't think they did one of those, but what happens if you get a lot of turbulence, which bothers passengers, but pilots don't care about, and there are ways of smoothing out the turbulence and making it a more comfortable ride for people.
I'm glad I asked that. I feel a little better. I'm not a good flyer.
Okay.
And I fly a lot.
Now that the pilots aren't doing anything up there anyway. I mean, it's just the computer bringing it up and down. Okay. Before we go, Charles, this has been great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I like to ask people, especially someone like you who's covered news in LA for 30 plus years, if you had one question for the one and only Cato Kalin, what you got? Anything you've ever been bugging to ask him?
I was curious because at the time, Cato, of the trial, you were characterized as a certain kind of person. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Which I didn't believe then, and I don't believe now. But I'm wondering, that must have bothered you at a very deep down level. You didn't show it, but I would imagine that you felt that. Am I right or wrong?
You're 100% right. Yeah, I didn't. I think part of it was because of certain stories that would come out, and it affected my mother so much and my family back in Wisconsin. So when I could hear her crying, it affected me that people could do this and make fun of me when they know that that's not the person. And you can't really fight it because it's a repeat story again in the media of being the freeloader or the dummy, the liar, all these things, even an assassin's target. So I was accused of so many things, and I just was, it's not me. And, it's 30 years ago, and I think being from Wisconsin, I kept tell Tom that I think the cream is finally starting to rise to the top from being a dairy product. But my byline to this day still is, never has a man done so little to be recognized by so many. And I go with that, and life
So
is.
you're embracing that?
Yeah, well, I embrace. You know what? Tom and I have done this show now. I think we're in our third year,
Oh yeah.
and I never wanted to embrace being part of a trial and the witness, but it's with me forever, and it's been so cathartic for me to do this show, and it helps out, and it's led to me speaking my last week, 2 weeks ago, doing a speech at Carmel, Monterey, and Seaside to the Police and Detective Association, and with Detective Tom Lang. And it was 3 hours, and I didn't think I could do 3 hours. It kept going on because more and more came out, and it was jam-packed. And I said, this is something I could do. And I also put in humor. Hard to put humor with a trial, but there's certain ways to go about of picking up how I was picked on. But they really, really, really dug it and understood, and I think it's going to lead to many great things.
No, good for you.
Yep.
Thanks.
All right, Charles. All right, so you're out of the day-to-day grind, and hopefully enjoying life. Enjoy the MLB playoffs, and
or football, whatever you enjoy.
But football season.
Am I glad? I feel like have we met? All this time we must have crossed paths.
That's a really good question. I do think after the trial, I don't remember. I don't remember. I talked to so many people, with that trial. We may have, but if we did, I actually don't have any strong recollection of it. So I'll settle on we haven't met.
Okay. Well, I had so many relationships with people, the reporters from Jim Moray on, and just so many, and I am sure that we would have been friends and still are. Yeah. So here we go. Thanks for doing the show. You were fantastic.
Yeah. Charles, thanks so much, man. Really appreciate it. Great insight on the 30-year anniversary of the OJ verdict. All right, keep your computer up for a couple minutes here as this continues to load. And you can exit the room or whatever you want to do, but just let that finish uploading, okay?
Okay. Is that where it says 99%?
Yeah, it'll say 100 or complete. So you're almost good.
Our producer, Zeus, will just say, go. It should be only a minute.
Yeah.
So if you need a bathroom break, go ahead.
Yep.
No. Well, I just actually had. I'm still recovering from surgery. So.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. All right. Well, I hope that's going well.
Can we ask what?
Huh? Yeah. No. I had a long history of diverticulitis, and at the end of June, I ended up. Normally, it came and went without any issues, but in June, I ended up being septic at Cedars. With blood poisoning from it. So we had to wait for things to cool down. And so 3 weeks ago, they went and they removed a section of colon and then put it all back together again. So,
wow. Okay. Well, that's a pretty intense procedure. So, you look good.
You look great.
I hope every day is better. Okay.
It's my post-surgery look.
Right. Well,
no, it looked great.
Yeah,
seriously.
and really thank you for doing this today. And we'll get you. I'll reach out to you later today to let you know when this is going to air.
And we'll put your book or whatever you want us on our.
You want us to promote your book or anything or
the book? Oh, the book is 2008.
Okay, fine. Okay. Hey, we'll have you on again for another big case or story.
Thanks a lot, Charles.
Come to the studio next time. Memory Lane, Cato. 30 years ago, Barbara Walters. By the way, they've had a couple great docs on her. What a career.
Yeah, I with the Charlie Sheen documentary, people would send pictures. I guess I'm part of the Barbara Walters one as well.
Yeah.
So I think hers is on Netflix also or Hulu. I don't know.
Yeah, there's been a couple of them. They're both really good. Yeah, so you're there, man. What a memory sitting there with Barbara Walters at the Peninsula. The hotel in the St. Regis.
The picture of us is at the Peninsula. But we did. But the Century Plaza was the when I sat for the verdict. But many, many times saw her here, saw her in New York, saw her in Washington D.C.
Yeah,
and Larry King passed away. Barbara Walters. It's amazing.
I know. Well, I'll tell you what, we're gonna have a few more OJ episodes because this is the time to do it right now. I'll tell you what, coming up on our next episode, Cato, this is gonna be a good one. The FBI agent who is responsible for capturing more FBI most wanted criminals than anybody else. It's going to be good.
Who is it? Can you wait? Is it? You can't tell?
Join us on the next episode. He's coming in studio too. Okay.
And people, like I said, Tom, I travel a lot. People watch our show. They want to know if we're live streaming soon.
We are going to be live streaming soon. As a matter of fact, we're going to 2 episodes starting probably in middle October. And one of them I'm hoping is going to be live. I want to do one live and then one with a great guest. So, all right, we're back. It's great to be back here. K-Train, you have a good weekend.
You're the best.
Zeus, great job today. Thanks to Charles. And thank you, everybody. Let's load it up with comments. Follow the K-Train and me on social media.
Go Brewers, go Packers.
And the Vikings, I'm weekly with them. It's up and down. I'll post something too on social media on my trip to Cleveland, where I flew back in the chairman's plane, the Gulfstream 700 with the chairman of FlexJet. It was really cool. I'll tell you more about it last time. All right, for Cato, I'm Tom Zenner. Thanks so much for watching Tom Zenner Scandal, and we will see you very, very, very soon.